Hello and welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Authors Series. This is a partnership between Writers and Books and Livonia Public Library. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is taking care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. Books are available through our bookstore Ampersand Books. I'll put the link in the chat. We're excited to have Mike Bond with us this afternoon. First, we'll hear him read a selection. Then he'll be in conversation with Brad Van Auken. Brad Van Auken is president and founder of BrandForward Incorporated, a brand strategy consultancy with clients throughout the world. Recognized as a leading expert on brand management and marketing, he is a much sought after speaker and writer. His book, Brand Aid, is used by many business schools to teach brand management. He serves on Writers and Books Board of Directors. Mike Bond is the author of 9 critically acclaimed best-selling novels, an award-winning poet, ecologist, and journalist. He has covered wars, revolutions, terrorism, military dictatorships, and death squads in the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. His novels take the reader into intense experiences in the world's most perilous places, making readers sweat with their relentless pace. America is the first in his 7-volume historical novel series capturing the transformations and heartbreaks of the last 70 years. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it. It's a delight to be with you all in Rochester and Livonia and all around that part of the world.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The floor is all yours. You can start to read.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, it's a delight to be here, and thank you both very much, and Writers and Books and Ampersand Books and the entire Livonia and Rochester Public Library system. Without libraries, we would no longer be a civilized world. So it's a delight also to be able to work with libraries anywhere and to kind of follow or search the same goals as yours, which are kind of to bring people together through reading and writing and thinking. And you just recently, just a minute ago, Dan, you mentioned taking care. And I think that's a really important concept and one that is rooted in human history and therefore very important to be considered even today when things get so chaotic and confused. And I think that if we were to look at it perhaps a little deeply, I think I might think that the major reason why I wrote America and the 6 novels that will come after is precisely that reason, to take care. It's in a sense, what I want to do is to take care of our country, all people, the world. You know, we all have the same goals. And I thought that by really trying to understand what happened in the past and during the turbulent and exciting 1960s, we might be able to have a better idea of what's happening now. If you like, Dan and Brad, I can read the foreword, which is just 2 pages to the first novel, America. It kind of explains for the listeners and the viewers what America, the first novel, and in fact, the entire series is all about. My goal was to start in the late 1950s, 1955, 57, and follow the lives of 4 people through the incredible turmoil of the 1960s And from then into the even more confused 1970s and all the way eventually through the series of novels to track these people through their entire lives right to old age. And let me start, if I may, just by reading a two-page foreword. I think that, again, would give everybody a sense of what the book is trying to do. After the Korean War ended in 1953, for nearly a decade, America was at peace. Despite the fear of communism, there was little active war. People flourished, ideas expanded, cities, roads, and suburbs grew, rural and wildlands diminished. These were the last gentle years before America killed its young president and collapsed into a war it could not win, into anti-war and civil rights revolutions, a bewildering new world of altered perceptions, and a chaotic tsunami of sexual and social evolutions. By 1965, Vietnam had shocked America with its horror, anguish, and brutality. A vast divide grew between those who supported the war and those against it. At the same time, the evils of segregation and the economic disparities within America were leading to a cosmic clash of riots and burning cities. And into this seismic rift, marijuana crashed its hedonic way, enticing people to doubt many beliefs previously accepted and to have fun, be kind, and follow the path with heart. And even worse, marijuana taught them to challenge authority by teaching that the individual has the right to decide how to live. Along with marijuana arrived other psychotropics that tease the mind into altered states of perception and wisdom, with profound results on morality and behavior. At the same time, the pill began to change the sex life of young Americans. For the first time, it was possible to make love with no fear of pregnancy. As more and more young people enjoyed more sex and the pleasures of marijuana, young men became less and less willing to go off to war and die. And into this primal upheaval erupted music and new music, raw, nasty, sexy, sardonic, loud, sometimes based on ancient melodies and often very beautiful. Music that bypassed the mind and grabbed the heart, and with lyrics that replaced schmaltz with naked, dirty truths. It was earth-shaking, the profoundest upheaval to strike America since the Civil War. A tragic and unpopular war, plus racial conflict, mind-enhancing drugs, powerful music, and tons of wild sex. The 60s shook America to its foundation with worldwide ripple effects. They framed the end of the 20th century and where we are today. This first book of the America series covers nearly a decade in the lives of four young people, Mick, Tara, Daisy, and Troy, and of many others who with them experienced the joys and miseries of the time. It opens in the shadows of World War II in Korea and ends as the US is sinking deeper into the horror of Vietnam. The first book begins and ends with a quest for love, for safety, for brotherhood, for hope, and for freedom. It's about the leap that must be taken before you land, the fear that must be surpassed before you can grow and become whole, and the distance that must be traveled before the house lights beckon you back to whatever it is you now call home. That is the opening, or if you wish, the foreword to the first novel of the America series. And I think it kind of sets the tone for what the book is attempting to do. As I said before, it's to remember then, to remember that period then, the 1950s through the 1960s, because it has many analogies with where we are now. And it's by seeing the past that we can perhaps better understand the present. And in the case where we are now, that's extremely important, significant. The other thing about too, the period of it was a very vital time, the 60s, incredibly much more vital than where we are now. there was an enormous sense of freedom in the air, the realization that the world was relatively open and one could do and go more or less where one wanted to. There, of course, the United States, for instance, was 1/3 less populated. There were many more millions and millions of acres of open land and forest and field that have since been all developed. And there are cities now where there were nothing but little towns back then. So just on the physical level, America has changed substantially. But in terms of the individual freedom, the freedom of the individual, it was without a doubt, it was much more significant back then. Imagine that a world, I mean, the period I'm writing about, the characters in the book, the people in the book, when they're teenagers, they have a phone in the house and it's an 8-party line. There was no such thing as the internet, no such thing as computers, no such thing as iPhones. You were much more free to be who you wanted to be without all of these coercions from herd behavior, such as the internet, the media, big tech, you name it. We all know today how atrociously dangerous all of this mind management is and the problems that it's going to lead us into in the future. So I get an enormous amount of reader response to this book, and I thank people very much for that. The response has been phenomenal. And a lot of people also say, gee whiz, it's so wonderful to remember that time. I was young in 1960s, and wow, what a different and exciting time it was, and I'd kind of forgotten, and it's nice to have a chance to see it again. So I've helped people to reignite their memories and to remember all the goals we had back in the 1960s for a better, freer, more productive, better united and greener world, none of which has happened, of course. But the time was so different back then that I can't say it just in a few words. You need to read the book to get all the flavor of that time. And what I've done in the book is to take these 4 people, Mick, Tara, Daisy, and Troy, and they have very different lives. And I mean, Mick, for instance, is kind of a football hero, anti-intellectual guy who goes on nonetheless to become kind of a rebel and ends up as a leader of the anti-war effort, or the effort in the United States to stop or slow down the Vietnam War. His sister Tara when she's in her early teens, she's been studying piano since she was 2. She's headed to Juilliard. She's a fantastic pianist. And then she runs into the Mississippi Blues, and that was quite a collision. And pretty soon she's so totally caught up in the magnificence, the magic of rock and roll and blues, that she evolves from a former Juilliard pianist into a vocalist with a well-known rock band, and that provides an enormous window into this magical eruption of rock and roll in the mid-60s and the blues, and its effect also on the whole country and on the thinking that people went through. And the third person is Daisy, who is Mick's girlfriend and who goes on to be very active in voter registration in the South and other civil rights issues, is very preoccupied also with the functioning of the human mind, and eventually goes to Stanford to do research on human mind and the effect of psychedelics on the human mind. To remembering, of course, that back then there were over 5,000 studies at Harvard, Stanford, Colgate, many other universities on the potentially beneficial effects of psychedelics on human health, psychological health. And then the fourth of the four young people is Troy, who escaped from an orphanage, ended up running into Mick, and was eventually adopted into Mick and Tara's family. And he's very excited about the prospects of getting out into space. He's very involved in studying and researching and designing airplanes, rocket ships, all of that. And he ends up going to the Air Force Academy and then ends up in Vietnam in the Marines. So we get four people with extremely different lifestyles, viewpoints, goals, ambitions, and we see the 60s late 50s, early 60s from their eyes. And many of the major events of the 1960s, I either had the privilege or the unfortunate reality of being caught up in, and I was very involved in politics, presidential elections. I was also a correspondent, war correspondent, human rights correspondent. So I ended up knowing a lot of people, from Bobby Kennedy on one side to Malcolm X, God bless him, on the other, and many other fantastic leaders in the areas that were changing in the world. So I've been able to weave into this novel of the growth of the growing up of these four young people with an entire network of real people and people I did know. And in addition, I'm able to, in the book, I use a rural atmosphere near New York City to evoke all the changes that have happened since that period. I mean, the story, the family where the kids live is a dairy farm family. I've been there for hundreds of years, and they work very hard. The kids end up starting the chores at 5:30 in the morning. They work an hour and a half. They walk 2 miles to school. They go to school all day, come home, do evening chores, do their homework, and go to bed. But it's an immensely happy family. So again, I'm looking at all of these evolutions. That area that is described in the book was paved over and is now an endless sea of little boxes, homes. So all of this represents what we've gone through in the United States for the last 70 years. Brad, are you still there? I can't see on the screen.
I am here. So do you want to get into some of the questions?
Yeah, let's do that. I can, you must be tired of hearing from me, so let's get
No, it's interesting to hear your thoughts on how you came to write that book. So one of the things that was interesting to me about when I read it is it explored the concepts of religion and freedom and free thinking and authority and what really matters, and racism and war and equality, all those things. So and if you don't mind, I'm going to read a couple passages from your book, because you didn't read except for your foreword, where I said, this is interesting. He's conveying a lot of philosophical ideas in the context of these four characters. So I'm just going to read a few. So that's the choice, money or freedom. Which you going to take, pal? Joe asks, right? So that's an interesting thing. Then, could God really want people to spend so much time on their knees adoring him? Was he really that needy, as Ma would say? In all the vastness of the stars in space, he didn't have better stuff to do? Even he must notice that folks who spent a lot of time adoring him seem to be the ones with the least love and kindness, the least like God. So, then another one, if God made a baby evil, how could he be a loving God? And then another one, and not let our hopes of heaven cheat us into not living now. And so I wrote down a bunch of these. I won't read all of them, but another one, he quickly lost interest in the endless inane dorm arguments about the existence or non-existence of God. It was a waste of time arguing with guys who didn't understand that religion's sole purpose was to mislead you into imagining death isn't real. or death isn't the end. Virtue is so boring, he told him. It has no social value. It's just self-abuse. That was Troy that said that. So my question here is, did you intend to convey certain philosophies, or were you just trying to chronicle the way that thinking was changing in that period of history?
That's a really, really interesting question, Brad, and you're taking me further into my brain than I usually go. So I
You're
would
welcome.
have to, I'm sorry, what?
I said, you're welcome.
Oh, yeah, thank you again. To a large extent, the people in my books, they kind of jump into my books, or sometimes they start a book. One person will start a book, and I don't really try to direct their characters in any way. It's almost as if I just describe who they are and what they say as they say it to me, which I think is a better way of writing. It's far less prefrontal cortex, if you wish. It's much more right brain, and I wasn't. The other thing too, and this is why it's such an interesting question, what you just asked, because those were the questions. Well, they're always dominant in culture, but they were particularly dominant then. I think because the Vietnam War, for instance, forced people to say, well, you saw on television, you saw an entire little village of people getting napalmed. And so you wonder, okay, did God allow that? And later on, and you more and more, I mean, I've been in so many atrocious situations and more that they inevitably enormously they paint your mind in certain ways. And I'm not an unreligious person. I'm kind of somewhat of a Catholic in the sense that I believe in the possibility of a higher spiritual power somewhere in the universe. In my own life, my experience in a number of extremely dangerous situations, very dangerous, is that I may not have survived. I kind of feel, and this is perhaps the way all survivors feel, I kind of feel that I've survived these because someone or something, some power far smarter than me, far smarter than I am, said, look, you idiot, you're about to get killed, get out of there. So my feeling about religion, and I think it soaks into the book, is that both atheism and belief are based on a belief. To be agnostic or to hope for a belief is simply to recognize that we can't know. And I think that was spreading in the 1960s. I think that certainly I recommend, I don't want to say, I take back. I found that hallucinogens had an enormous religious effect on many people. Since then, it's interesting that in the early 2020s, Johns Hopkins University did a number of studies on psilocybin, and they got people to take the drug in a kind of a protected situation, and later they asked them their response, and the majority of the people said it was one of the 5, if not the most religious experiences in their lives. And Johns Hopkins even went so far as a year later to query them again, and the response was even stronger. And they also queried the families that these people lived in, and the families almost unanimously found that the person was happier, more productive, and on and on. So what I'm saying is that the 60s, with the introduction of psychotropic drugs, had an enormous effect on how people saw religion. I'm probably going on too long about that, but it was to my mind, it was one of the most important aspects of the 60s. And even if it didn't free everyone, I mean, I don't know what percentage of people between 18 and 30 might have taken psilocybin or LSD, but it was an influence that permeated the entire culture. And the question of God and violence is obviously one that's been around since our prehistoric days. But it's one we have to keep asking ourselves in order to understand what spiritual power might conceivably be.
Yeah, I really enjoyed a lot of the questions you were exploring. They're kind of universal questions, right? And it makes sense that you've been exposed to war, and that brings some of those questions even to the fore, I think, when you experience
Definitely.
something that makes no sense.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were kind of Catholic in the universal sense. Catholic can mean something very specific and or something universal. But I did have the question, did you grow up in the Roman Catholic faith? Because I find that a lot of people that grew up in the Roman Catholic faith might write about God and religion the way you did, or the way you portrayed it in the book. So I'm just curious.
Well, I didn't grow up. In fact, I grew up with parents who were agnostic, but it was a large Irish family. And, I mean, they were the rebels. And to say Irish family means Catholic family, unless it's from North Ireland. And Catholicism is so deeply rooted in the culture of Ireland that the two are almost indistinguishable. And many of the good aspects of Catholicism are evident in Ireland, which is, again, as earlier in the program, I believe it was Dan talked about the idea of taking care is the idea for this year. And I think the good Catholic Church, as opposed to some of the silly parts or disgusting parts of it, is based largely on taking care. But in my late 20s, when I met my wife, who was Catholic, I began to understand some of the many fabulous sides of Catholicism. And basically, in terms of giving, taking care of others, being honest, working hard, having strong, solid families, all of those things are very important for the future of our culture. And so those are some of the benefits I was talking about, Brad.
Okay. And so you had mentioned that the four characters in the book were quite different. The four primary characters were quite different from one another. Is there any one of the characters to which you personally relate on any level or in any way more than another?
Well, I would say Mick being, I mean, I played a lot of football and he's very much like me, a total rebel. I hated school from the first day of kindergarten until I finally dragged myself to graduation of college. And he's a fighter, a football player, and he loves the wilderness. When I was young, I would go out in the forest from the time I was 4 and spend the entire day wandering around the forest, and suddenly realized it was getting dark and I had 2 miles in the woods to get home. And then I'd be in trouble because I hadn't done my chores. And so Mick is very much like that. And when I was younger, I just absolutely physically loved football. It was beyond, it was so much fun that it kind of, for a period of time, just kind of took over my life. And I now have multiple injuries and a very sore body as a result. But so the other people also are very much part of my own being. I mean, Troy, who went to the Air Force Academy, he's preoccupied and loves jet planes, fighter planes of all kinds, the whole concept of flight. And that I was that way too. And until I was headed to the Air Force Academy, and then my eyesight got bad and I couldn't go, because back then there was no point. You couldn't be a pilot if you didn't have 20/20 or 20/10 eyesight. And his whole kind of loner attitude and the extent that PTSD smashed up a lot of his mind, certainly is relevance for me. I have an enormous amount of PTSD and sometimes wake up in the middle of the night in a horrible situation, not knowing where I am. so I certainly, that's part of what Troy's PTSD is, certainly part of my life. As far as the two young women, Tara, when she shifted into blues and rock and roll, man, that's right up my street. And I never could play the piano, but I've been playing the guitar for, God, 45 years. And I'm absolutely into heavy metal, hard rock and roll. I love the blues. I play both electric and six string. I don't play most acoustic very much. I can't even remember the name. But I play a lot of really nasty rock and roll, and so that's and Daisy, the fourth major character, who grows up on a farm nearby, another dairy farm. She parallels me in two things: in her preoccupation, in her dedication to humanity, her dedication to giving everyone in the world some form of protection and equal chance. And she goes in 1965, after the 1964 voting, a whole voting revolution in Mississippi. She goes down there and works with Al Lowenstein, who was one of the founders of the Mississippi voting campaign, and whom I worked with on many different things. I worked with Al Lowenstein on anti-war stuff, as well as on human rights, voting rights, and so she's very much into that, and also preoccupied with the human mind and how does it work. I'd love to know how the human mind works. I think and think and think about it, which is, it's very difficult. So she goes off to Stanford after 2 years in Africa. She goes off to Stanford to get a PhD in really the human mind, and so all of those. This is a long-winded response, Brad, to your question, but all four of those young people are very much part of me. And I also, just give you other examples. I mean, I did know Malcolm X when I lived in Harlem, and I thought he was an extraordinary human being. And there are so many parallels in his mind with my mind that I even feel, part of him in a way. And I worked for Bobby Kennedy, and I loved him enormously. He was an extraordinary human being, and the deaths of his brother and him has totally ruined history and shattered the United States in ways from which it will never recover. So all of these are in the book, and they're all. I could look at Bobby Kennedy. I mean, he was Irish. What the hell? He was like the punk guy down the street. And so anyway, I don't know if that answers it.
No, it does. Thanks for that. I wanted to share with you, given your love of the music, and I knew all the music that you were talking about in the book. I lived in New York City, and one time I was on the elevator with some friends, and a friend of mine, just the guy I knew from my building, came on the elevator, and I said, "Hi, Chuck." He said, "Hi, Brad." And he got off the floor before I did, and then everybody in the elevator said, "Brad, you know Chuck Berry?" And I'm like, "Chuck Berry? I didn't know he was Chuck Berry."
Yeah, right.
And we just knew each other well enough to say hi in the elevators, but he was a "Hi, Brad, hi, Chuck." I had no idea that he was living in my building.
Wow. Where was that?
It was on the Upper West Side on 70th and just off from Broadway. But I think he just lived there for a short time. I know later he was in Missouri, and I kind of followed where he went and all that. But it was kind of funny. So
what a cool memory.
Yeah.
What a cool memory.
Yeah.
Well,
And how ignorant. It's like, oh, I didn't know who it was.
No, I play with him every night. Yeah, we play music every night. Yeah, he's in America too. At one point, the musician character Tara is musing over the links or the potential links between Beethoven, Mozart, and rock and roll. And she concludes at the end of a little self-dialogue that Beethoven, it was when Chuck came up with that marvelous song, "Move Over Beethoven." And she concludes that Beethoven would have loved Chuck Berry, would have loved the music. And he was out there rocking with us. Yeah.
So another question, your characters were pretty sexually active. And so I'm assuming that was because you were trying to convey the sense of sexual revolution during the time, but you went into some detail in some cases of them enjoying themselves with each other. I mean,
Absolutely.
is that right?
Oh my God, it was so wild. I mean, talk about Manhattan. I lived in New York from 1966 in Manhattan, from 1966 to 68. I lived in the East Village when it was about the most dangerous place on earth, and then I lived in the middle of Harlem, which wasn't unduly safe either. And then I lived in Greenwich Village, and I had an absolutely wonderful time. And there was what I mentioned, or what we both were talking about earlier with regard to sexual evolution, or the evolution of sexual behaviors, is that the pill, as mentioned in the book often, made an enormous difference in people's behaviors, because for a young woman to take a chance on getting pregnant is a life-changing and possibly life-destructive choice. And once you were free of that, once you, as a young woman, once you were free, it was, the sky was the limit. And some young women felt, wow, why not enjoy as much as I can? Others were more restricted, but still felt free. And yeah, I mean, my God, everybody was doing it with everybody back then, and it was a blast.
Yeah, so much for our Puritan ethic.
Oh yeah, we've definitely gone downhill since then. Yeah.
So, it's really interesting. It's the first time I've read you, and I really like your writing style. I like of course, I read a lot of nonfiction where it's very dense, and you sometimes have to reread a paragraph twice to understand what's said. But kind of going from Steinbeck to Faulkner in terms of writing style, who are some of the authors other than yourself that you really admire, or that you've modeled yourself after, or you just you say, I really like the way they write?
Yeah, I've never at all really have I consciously attempted to mimic or to write similarly to some other writers' writing style. That being said, nonetheless, we are very largely influenced by who we read and who we appreciate, as you just pointed out. And I'm growing up, I mean, like many, and I suppose this was really more of a boy thing, many adventure novels in the night when I was 10, 11, 12. Sir Walter Scott, you name it, Anthony Adverse, and the marvelous man-eaters, not novels, but books from India, so many different things. And by the time I really got into serious reading, I was in high school, and I had a magnificent high school English teacher named Isabel Pease, who was long gone, unfortunately. But great teachers like libraries are essential to guarding our cultural heritage and challenging our minds. And she, by the time I was 14 years old, we were getting a heavy dose of fine literature, and on a rapid basis. And these things have changed these days, I think, and young people don't get barraged with so much stuff. But we were reading all kinds of things, James Baldwin, all kinds of things as well. But the one that struck me most deeply, of course, was Ernest Hemingway. And I do feel that in English, of the writers of the 20th century, he's certainly my first choice. I don't know of any other writer of the thousands and thousands of writers that I've read that can compress so much emotion into such few words and smash you over the head with emotion and put you in the middle of wherever that book is at the moment. And so he was extremely important. Faulkner was kind of important, but I got tired of his soliloquies. Steinbeck was fun. Sometimes his lesser books more fun than the others. Jane Austen, I adored. I adored Jane Austen, and the poetry side, Emily Dickinson. There was so much. I mean, literature in English, and it's true in French and in Russian also, in every language, literature is so rich. You can spend so many years just reading and understanding. So all of them had an impact. And then when I got to college and started reading the existentialists, that was mind-blowing also. And when I was 19, I think it was, I got thrown out of college, and so I drove a truck for 8 months and made a little money, and went to France for 4 months to study in France. And I didn't like studying in France any more than I did in the States. So I was in Aix-en-Provence, and I would climb up. I was into rock climbing at the time, and I would climb the steeple of the cathedral and sit up there on top of the steeple and read Camus and all the other existentialists all day. And I don't think style-wise that they impacted me, but their thinking process, particularly Albert Camus, to my mind, like I said, Hemingway being the greatest English language writer of the 20th century, I would certainly say Albert Camus is the second best, the best French, excuse me. But that's just my own personal stuff. And my opinion is no more valuable than anybody else's. But yeah, to be fair, in this long, circuitous circle back to your question, I deliberately have never tried to imitate any type of style or ever paid attention. The thing is, and this is why everybody needs to write. This is why every single person needs to write, because what it does is you write a little bit and your true self starts to come out. And just like the more you write as a novelist or a poet, the more your true style comes out, and it's only you. And it's composed of everybody you've read over time, plus your mother telling you to go out and feed the chickens, but that's what it is. It's much better as just one word for other writers out there. Never try to mimic anybody's style, or you end up being, secondary.
Well, it's interesting when you were describing, you said, well, yeah, I went to France and didn't like their that over there either. And then, I climbed up and it's like, wait, I think that was all in the book.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So it's like he's talking about a character in the book and it's him.
What I've in my 9 previous novels, what I've tried to do, and they're often seen as thrillers, but what I try to do is to take an important event, whether it's a civil war in Guatemala or elephant poaching in Africa, and build that into a novel. And so I can put my readers in the middle of it in an emotional level, and so that they remember that place, that situation, as if it had happened to them. And oftentimes I use my own recollections as part of this. And as a general rule, I never, ever write about any place I haven't been, and right down to the street corner. If I describe a street corner in Paris, it's because I know it. And if some horrible thing happens, usually I've been in the midst of something just like it. So I don't make things up. And that's why you probably noticed that connection with what I just said about climbing cathedral towers.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to switch a little bit. I ask everybody this, and then I end up having to buy more books. What's the most interesting book you've read in the last year? Anything that you think has just really been interesting.
Oh my God, I read so many. I often wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm done sleeping, and so I'll spend several hours reading. My God, that's tough. I read Hemingway every year, just about every other year. I read Albert Camus repeatedly. I read L'Étranger, The Stranger, over and over again. Recently, I've been reading James Jones, Here to Eternity and The Thin Red Line, and he's brilliant. He's brilliant. I wish he didn't natter on so much about people's thoughts, but certainly it's a major book. I've just read a wonderful nonfiction book called Feline Philosophy by James Gray, an absolutely brilliant British philosopher, tries to determine or tries to describe how cats think. What is cat philosophy, and what can we learn from cats about our own lives?
As a cat owner, and I'm constantly thinking about that. Like, what is Luna thinking? What is Chloe thinking?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we've had cats all our lives, and I just absolutely adore them. And I've also hung around. Excuse me, losing my voice here. I've also hung around a lot with big cats, principally lions in Kenya, in the wild, and also with members of the cat family in Central America in the jungle. And they're much more difficult to find. They're very secretive because they're constantly being shot. Lions in Africa, though, they're down to a very small percentage of what their original populations were, are still fascinating to watch. But to return to your question, Brad, there's so many other wonderful books. Leon Uris, I've been reading a lot of him lately. John D. MacDonald is wonderful. He's a little bit narrow.
That was my mother's favorite. She read every single one of his books.
Yeah. And it's funny that we have all this genre foolishness in literature, and certain publications will review you unless you're published by a major house, or if you're a thriller writer, oh my God, you'll never get reviewed. But John D. MacDonald is great literature. He just he's not taught at Harvard in literary classes, which is a real mistake because they're teaching something useless like Ulysses instead. And so, God, you got me thinking. I read so constantly, they go in and out of my brain. I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but.
No, you have. Well, thank you. I've got at least one new book I'm going to read. So that's great. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, and I know we can't see how many people are out there listening, but if you got a question, put it in the Q&A, because I don't want to dominate the questions. I will, but I don't necessarily want to. I want to give you a chance to ask some questions too. And while they're putting their questions in, if they do put their questions in, one of the things I want to ask you is about your future books in the series. Can you just tell us, do you know what each book is going to be about, and how you selected what each book is going to be about?
Yeah, that's a very good question too, Brad. Yeah, my second of the series, which will be at least 7 novels, providing I stick around that long. There's a few people out there trying to make sure I don't. But the second and third books are already written, and the second book continues the America series. The second book is called Freedom, and it will be out in October and November of this year, and it follows the people in the country and the world through until the tent revolution of 1968 in Vietnam. And the third book, and it ends in the mid-70s, early 70s. And the third book, which is also written, will go almost to the end of the 1970s. So at that point, if I do 4 more books, I basically got a decade for each book. And again, I was very involved in many things in that period. I did a lot of war journalism. I was intensely involved in politics nationwide in the US. I was involved by accident in a number of foreign coups instigated by the CIA, all of which I describe in my books. I was also very interested in the space race and all that, so that comes into the book. So it's kind of spread out over those 7 books. The last 4 will be a kind of a decade each.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I see that. All right, I see something in chat saying that we've run out of time. Dan, how are we on time? I want to make sure we're being respectful of time.
I'm afraid that's our time.
Oh, there we go.
But thank you so much. This was a great talk. I really appreciate hearing your work and hearing the conversation. Thank you so much. Please buy the book. The link is in the chat. I want to thank Livonia Public Library. This reading, as well as our previous readings, will be online. You can find it on our website, wab.org. And I want to say thank everyone for coming, and have a great weekend.
Thank you both very much, and the people of Livonia and Writers and Books and Ampersand Bookstore and all of the folks in Rochester, New York. And thank you both very much, all of you.
Thank you, Mike.
Take care.
Take care.